welcome to Elements of Ayurveda, Empowering Wisdom of Life. I'm your host, Colette, and in this podcast, I hope to empower you to take charge of your own health by sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. We will also discuss topics like health and wellness, nutrition, yoga, fitness, meditation, breath work, and much more, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to each other. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe to the show, and the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend you listen to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. I've also set up a Facebook group for us to connect and to support each other, and I'd love for you to join me over at Elements of Ayurveda podcast group. And now, here's the show. Hi everyone, I just wanted to jump in here because I'm getting a lot of questions about my upcoming programs, the group programs that are starting January 18th, 2019. I have two programs starting. I have the 21-day digestive reset cleanse, and I also have the 49-day or 7-week online reset, restore, renew program. Both programs are online, and I know from the emails I'm getting that many of you are thinking about cleansing after the holidays and starting the new year out, taking care of your health and well-being. So what I've done is I've put together a webinar, and the webinar is called Cleanse Your Body, Your Mind, Your Life with Ayurveda, and I go into detail on the programs and I compare the two programs so it's make it easier for you to decide. I have some spaces left. I have a limited amount of spaces because I do a 90-minute private online consultation with everybody who joins either of these programs. So I have limited slots in my calendar. I would really encourage you to check out the webinar and see which one is best for you. Again, I'll put the link to that webinar, the Cleanse Your Body, Your Mind, Your Life with Ayurveda, in the show notes, or you can access it on my website by going to elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Click on that orange Start Here button on the top right-hand corner, and you'll find the webinar link there. And on that page, you can register. Once you register to the program, I'll send you a link to my calendar to book your private 90-minute online consult, and then we can get going on restoring and rejuvenating your mind and body and setting you up for a great start to 2019. So check out the webinar. I hope it helps, and don't hesitate to contact me by email, info@elementshealingandwellbeing.com, or just book that free 20-minute discovery call where we can hop online and I can answer any questions you have. Don't forget the programs start January 18th. That's for the group programs. The private programs are ongoing throughout the year, but for that group discount, they start January 18th. So there you go. That's all the information that you need if you want to cleanse and start your new year off taking care of your health and well-being. And now here's the show. Hello and welcome to Elements of Ayurveda. Today I'm very honored to be joined by Pat McCabe. Woman Stands Shining. Pat McCabe is from the Diné Nation. She is the mother of 5 children, a grandmother, a writer, artist, and speaker. As Holy Earth surface walker, life bringer, life bearer, she claims her authority to speak always on behalf of life and to call community attention to placing life at the center in all discussion, planning, and activity. She teaches on the subjects of sacred feminine, sacred masculine, economy, paradigm, Indigenous Ways of Knowing, or Science for Thriving Life worldwide. She also takes part in many Indigenous peoples' gatherings taking place all around the Mother Earth at this time. Pat, it's such an honor and pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am thrilled. And I was first introduced to you, Pat, via the Shift Network's Indigenous Global Summit, which happened in November 2018. And I was really fascinated by your talk. Now, before I go on and ask you lots of questions, I would like to ask you about the word Indigenous and how you feel about that word.
Well, that has come to be a very powerful word for me. Personally, as I try to talk about what Indigenous peoples have to offer to the world at this time. And so, that word Indigenous actually means to be of place. Okay. To be of place. And so that's what I feel like the medicine of Indigenous peoples is to, they are human beings of place. And actually what I've been saying about that is that, culture actually isn't a human construct. I think from my study and inquiry, I feel like really culture is the Mother Earth expressing herself as human being in any given place. My people come from the desert here in the Southwest United States, and so we have a very particular orientation versus, say, people on the islands of Hawaii or up in the Himalayas, so they all have a very different relationship, and their culture, their language, their understanding, and their relationship to as global citizens, and I might even say galactic citizens, comes out of that deep, deep relationship with place. So to me, that's a very appropriate word to be called Indigenous. And at this point, I guess it's controversial for some to say that we are all Indigenous. But I feel that that's a very important recognition that we need to have of ourselves right now. We are all indigenous to this Mother Earth. We're not indigenous to Mars or Pluto or Jupiter or some asteroid somewhere, or even in a disembodied dimension. No, we are embodied here on this Mother Earth, and so we are indigenous to her, and that shapes us, obviously. And yet I think that in some ways we're fish that are trying to figure out that we're in water in terms of our being indigenous to Mother Earth. So that word to me is very profound right now.
Yes, thank you, Pat, for that explanation. That's really wonderful. And I think that Indigenous people hold the key, particularly the ancient teachings hold the keys that we need right now to figure out what we're doing in this world, because we're making many mistakes. And Ayurveda teaches us that we're a part of nature, and that establishing balance really requires living in tune with nature and not being separate from it like we are now. And our world has really lost its way in connection with Mother Nature. Can you tell us why our connection to Mother Nature is so important?
Well, so I actually come from two different Indigenous perspectives, I guess you could say. By blood, I'm Diné, and but by training and lifestyle and life choice, I guess you could say, I actually was brought into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and that's where my name comes from, actually, Weyakpanajinwi, and that English translation is Woman Stand Shining. Beautiful. But so I'm going to say a little bit about what my perception of what I've been taught about that, our connection to nature, so to speak. So even that way of phrasing it is kind of letting us know where we are on the map.
Right, exactly.
because we are nature. Yes. And so, from the Lakota teaching that I received, what we say is that there is the sacred hoop of life, and that every form of life gets to have has the honor of being given a place on this sacred hoop. So the grasshoppers, the platypus, the humans, the fungi, the ocean creatures, everybody has an honored seat on this sacred hoop of life. And so, we are so, one thing that I say is that if any member of the hoop of life doesn't uphold their part, then the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And so, this mass extinction event that people talk about right now, where we're losing, 200 plus species a day right now. I mean, that is such a difficult visual for me as I picture that sacred hoop of life. Yeah. But even cultures and peoples that have been wiped out, didn't have their natural trajectory completed. That's also a difficulty for us. So So I guess from that perspective, we're interwoven, we're interrelated, and I love that Thich Nhat Hanh, came up with that word that he calls us. We're an interbeing.
Yes. And
so, through our institutions and indoctrinations in different to the current paradigm, we have this idea that somehow we can be separate. And so even our structures that we build, there are whole urban centers where, as far as the eye can see, pretty much the dominating landscape is everything that comes out of the human mind, right, and nothing else. Yeah. And so that creates this illusion, I think, that we are not a part of nature. Mm. To the point of where our children believe that, water just comes out of the tap. That's just where it comes from, right? Well, right. No, the water comes from the earth and from the sky. And there's this very powerful, and at the same time, delicate, relationship that goes on there that allows us to have this magical medicine that we call water. Mm. So to have recognition of that, of being an interbeing with what I call the larger community. So we say the flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-legged ones, all of the plant peoples, nations, standing nation, the trees, and all the waters, the sky, everything. We are intricately related to all of this. And so to not have some awareness of that, in my view, is to be quite diluted, and it creates big problems personally, interpersonally, and obviously globally.
Absolutely. And yes, it's all an ecosystem. To think that we're separate from any of this is it's mind blowing that we've come this far thinking that we can dominate nature and that we don't have to pay any regard to Mother Nature. Now, you mentioned, Pat, about water there, and I know you have a special connection with water, and you believe that water, of course, is life, but also has consciousness. Can you tell us that wonderful story you have about your connection with water, and also explain to us about the power of water?
Yes. So I had this experience here at my house in which water started coming up out of the ground. Mm. Like right in my backyard, and I live in a little, speaking of urban, to live in this beautiful Taos land, and right now I'm living in town in a house, so it's a little bit of a urban neighborhood, and so anyway, this water started coming up in my backyard, and it was a lot of water, and so I started having to have this relationship with water like I never had before, and this water began to instruct me. Because I was having these conversations with the water because I didn't want it to flood my house. And right. And water in the desert is such a precious thing that I also, I wasn't sure how I should try to hold it. And so in a way I was trying to keep it very private. I mean, not with the idea of like no one else should use this, but just its existence. Yeah. And so I didn't want it running out on the street. I didn't want it running into the neighbors. Right. I didn't want it flooding my house. And so anyway, I would have these conversations with it. And through that, I ended up, being able to surrender to it. I had an elder say that, when the water comes like that, it's a very sacred and holy and also kind of wild, like feral being. And so I decided to submit myself to this water and say, look, if you need to take my house and this little plot of land, I can live with that. That's okay with me. Wow.
Can I just interrupt you there just to put it in context? Because you are living in the desert, right? You're located. Yes. So to have this water, it wasn't like a burst main or something. It was like this water was coming up in your yard.
Well, I'm going to correct you there because actually it turned out to be a burst main.
Oh, it was.
But here's the thing about that. So the area that I live in historically had used to have springs, and then with all the development here, they kind of receded. And so, and actually, I have neighbors who do have that are very close by, like within a quarter mile, I would say, that have live springs coming up on their land.
Okay.
And so, it wasn't surprising. I mean, it didn't seem surprising to me that in a way that this water would come up here. But what I wanted to say about it being a burst main, I also had it tested. They told me this has amazing mineral content. There is no way this could be city water. I had a very famous dowser come out, and he checked it out, and he's like, no, this is a spring. And so anyway, we were operating under that circumstance. But every now and then I would say to myself, I'm like, but gosh, what if I'm just like completely deluded and thinking that the spring is popping up here when in fact maybe it has something to do with the town waterworks or whatever. And so I was kind of going back and forth in this place of confusion. And eventually, my spirit helpers came to me and they said, what difference does it really make? Yeah. The water is the water is the water. And it has come to you for a reason, and we have some learning to do here. So that's kind of what ended up happening with it. So in any case, this water that was at my house ended up telling me to go to another natural body of water, which was a lake nearby. And, I guess I should back up and say that, this water coming up behind my house, we were still having this conversation, and I was worried about it flooding. And so I had to leave to go do some work. I travel a lot in my work, and I had to leave for 2 weeks. And I just had to tell this water, look, I don't know what you're going to do because I have to go, and I still don't know how to be with you. And so this water split in two directions and dropped down into the earth.
Wow.
It was so clearly a response to what I was
That's amazing.
about.
So completely missed the house, didn't go into the house.
Yes.
Wow.
And actually all of the flow of the water, it was flowing on the surface, but also underground. And that's what the dowser was seeing. And he was telling me, he said, the path that the water took underground it went the only direction it could go to empty out into this field. So it bypassed all these houses that are all around me and took this one path that it could take to go out to the field. And there were, sort of like watery plants starting to come up in the field there. So it was just this amazing journey to watch this consciousness and to really feel this conversation that I was having with the water. And then when it told me to go to this larger body of water, that's when I got this from that lake, which I'd been to many times, but it had never instructed me like it did that time after being told, you need to go over there. And what it said was, to pray in the water is to amplify your prayer. It really amplifies the prayer in an exponential way. And part of the way that was described to me was they said, the water can travel. The water can travel through the clouds. The water can travel through underground rivers. It's always in motion. It has a way of moving,
Yes.
And if it's still long enough, even it evaporates or it drains into the earth. So it's always on the move. And so what they said to me was, my intention, my prayer, my song, my declaration of receiving this holy gift of life would travel in that water and bless everything everywhere it went. And that consciousness and that intent would inform and join with all the other living beings that drank from this water. So I had this image of it coming down the Andes and the jaguar eventually drinking it, the condor drinking it, the snow leopard drinking it in the Himalayas. And it was just this incredible, beautiful image of how that was being spread. And then, it also said, but this water doesn't only travel through space, it travels through time because it's always been the same water.
Right.
And so it was proposed to me that, that all of the peoples and all of their prayers, because people almost always have water in their ceremonies, that I was actually partaking of all of that wisdom, that knowledge, that reverence for this life, and so that I could partake in that long lineage of prayer and ceremony with the water. And also, every time I prayed with the water, that I would be, sort of adding to that long lineage of prayer. And so we say that water is the first medicine. And so it is. If you've ever been very, very ill, that that's the one you want. You want the water. You don't want a Red Bull or a Diet Coke. You want... you want that water, and so it's so as my elders say about the fire, they say the ceremonial fireplace is the highest school there is. There'll never be a higher school than the sacred fire, and you'll never find a place with more wisdom than that. But I'm going to also say that that's also true of the water. I don't think we begin to really understand everything that the water is, and so that just opened my eyes.
Yeah, so powerful.
Even further to the magic and the mystery of this place that we have been placed in. It's truly extraordinary.
Well, absolutely. It's just extraordinary to think that, the water has been there through all times, with all peoples, and it just recycles in different forms. And that is just truly amazing and can carry our messages within it. Yeah. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. So, Pat, you told about it earlier when you were talking about the cities and the our dominant nature as humans and the lack of nature within the cities, and that brings to mind this pyramid structure that you talk about. That's not working for us. That the humans have built this kind of pyramid structure, and can you explain that structure for us, to the listeners, and then what's wrong with this structure? What's wrong with this way we have structured our lives today?
I guess when I talk about the pyramid structure, what I'm actually talking about is this paradigm that we have. I'm going to say that we have chosen, that we have consented to, even though, in a way, that's not fair to say, because we're so indoctrinated into it as though it is reality, the only possible reality, that our ability to understand that we have choice in it is pretty hidden from us.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that my guidance keeps telling me that I have to keep proposing, is that paradigm is a choice. We can choose any paradigm that we want. And that is part of this construct, which is the law of free will, I guess you could say. And so paradigm is a choice. And right now we are choosing, by not contesting or changing, a power over paradigm is what I call it. And in a power over paradigm, might makes right. And so throughout the ages, that might, and still to this day, but in some cases it's more implied today, but it was just by brute force. Whoever had the brute force was going to be on top, which is partly how the masculine of our kind has come to dominate all these different systems, institutions, law, etc., is because of that. It really comes down to the brute force.
Yeah.
And so even today, it's more implied in some ways, in some of the structures, corporate structures, etc. The people aren't actually generally clubbing each other over the head in the office or anything, but it's still implied because if you don't cooperate at the right moment, you can have your food, clothing, and shelter, torn out from under you at any moment.
Yeah.
And so on some level you have to be cooperative, and on another level you're always looking for your opening to become the person who has power over another, right? That structure, it is not conducive to cooperation or collaboration. And in current science, what we've come to understand is that this idea of survival of the fittest is actually not how all of the rest of nature and the Mother Earth works at all.
Yeah.
The way that the rest of nature and the Mother Earth works is under the law of survival of the collaborative. And so that old idea of survival of the fittest is getting turned on its head, even through scientific structure. And so what I want to say about it is, if we're an interbeing, this power over paradigm actually doesn't fit with that.
Right.
And so what's happening in that is that we're starting to see the results of it. So we could say that maybe some people might say in this country, and especially this comes up when I talk to men, that, maybe this structure appeared to be working well for your great-grandfather and even for your grandfather. It started breaking down with your dad, suddenly your dad is like needing a couple fingers full of scotch every night just to deal with being in the system and, all of that. So the toll on those who were dominant in that system, we're beginning to see the fallout from that, the way the men have been suffering from being in that system. Men's suicide rates, men's depression, men's even I would say sexual difficulties are embedded in this really difficult system that I don't think we're actually designed emotionally or spiritually or physically to be in. And so, what I say about that is that the women have primarily been kept out of that system. And in order to be in that system, although this is going to be put to the test as of yesterday, women have pretty much had to take on, that power over role model. And I was about to say that masculine way, but that's actually, I feel like it's really important for us to understand that we associate those ways that occur in the power over paradigm with men because men are dominating in that system. But that's not actually masculine characteristic. And that was a really beautiful awakening that my spirit guides gave to me. They said, you think you know what masculine is, but you don't. And you think you know what feminine is, but you don't. All you know is how those two energetics behave in a power over paradigm. Right. But if you change the paradigm, and there are peoples all over the planet who have known other paradigms other than that one, and you will find that those energetics, those medicines, if you will, behave in an entirely different way when they're put in different paradigms. So, I'm kind of on a campaign to say that I want to separate, masculine even from that term patriarchy. Right. Because the patriarchy to me is referring to that power over paradigm way and outlook. Yeah. And I think men really need to be, we all need for men to be liberated from that identity as part of their masculinity. Absolutely, because if we go back to the ecosystem, we need men to step into their genuine, their truth, their genuine power in order for the ecosystem, for that hoop of life to survive. We need each other to step into our innate natures, our interbeing, right? And what you referred to there as the test as of yesterday was, I'm assuming you're referring to the House of Representatives where lots of women just got sworn into Congress. That's in the US, which is absolutely amazing to see this diverse group of women, lots of women and men, get sworn into Congress. So we're starting to see big shifts happening in the US, which is amazing. So now I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about those masculine qualities and not the ones associated with this patriarchal system, and also the feminine qualities. And how, how they could be different and how we can begin to reconcile. Because I know your primary work is the reconciliation between the masculine and the feminine. And so what do we need to understand about these energies that we don't today? Well, first, I want to say that part of the inspiration for this reconciliation work is because of the way it was proposed to me. What I was told was, so right now, humanity, we could say, is being asked to birth itself anew. And in order to do that, we need to heal this wound that is at the core of our procreative abilities. Okay. So that has to do with the energetic of the masculine and the feminine and the way that they come together in what I call a functional polarity. And so the construct on this earth is pretty much, it's everywhere we look. Two different and yet similar things come together. And when they do, it creates the furtherance of their kind. That's how this construct is in terms of the furthering of life. And so And so if we want to birth ourselves anew, we need to heal this terrible wound that is between us.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go back to the hoop of life image again and say that so every form of life gets to have its seat on that hoop. Mm-hmm. And each one of us has a perfect design to uphold our part of the hoop. Mm. And so if we watch, I think partly that's why we're so fascinated by watching all of the natural world around us, whether it's plants or animals, insects. We just really enjoy watching the order, I'm going to say, that they have, the coherence that they have, the way that they contribute their coherence is very soothing to us. And so what occurred to me was, so let's say the flying ones have this, the swimming ones have this, the creepy crawling ones have this, the four-legged ones have this. So everything around us has this, but we don't have this perfect design. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So I come to the conclusion that we also have a perfect design for thriving life on this sacred hoop of life. And so what is that? So that was kind of the beginning of a huge inquiry for me in which I'm asking myself, so what is my perfect design for thriving life? And for me, the question also was, why did I come here as the embodied feminine at this time? Like, what does it mean to be that for my species? And how do and in what way do I carry a perfect design that contributes to the health and well-being and coherence of all of us as an interbeing? And so through that lens, what I realized was that indigenous cultures had a lot to tell me about that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to say something that I say in probably almost every talk I ever give, which is to say that, so what I want to say about the indigenous peoples is I say if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who have lived in one place for an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, in relative health, harmony, and happiness.
Absolutely.
And so those people are actually the peoples who hold the deep science of what we're now calling sustainability, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why I look to indigenous peoples, and not just my own people or the Lakota culture that I was brought into. But I'm in these indigenous peoples gatherings that I attend all over the world, I'm really watching, and I notice that there are people object. A lot of indigenous people object to this idea of a pan-native narrative or a pan-indigenous narrative. But I find it can be very useful for us, right? Because there are similarities. Mm-hmm. There are threads, again, of coherence that run through all of these cultures that have such a profound relationship to place. Mm. So what I'm going to say is, in order to have this profound relationship with place, I'm gonna detour. So you might have to remind me of where we were headed, but I'm going to detour here to say one other thing here. So how do we have this profound relationship with place? Well, I read this book when I was at the university, and it was called Native Science, and it was by Dr. Greg Kahete, who lives just down the road from me, actually. And he's a beautiful elder here. And so anyway, in this book, he laid out this logic that he had, and it just changed my life. It changed everything for me, because he said, now why is it that all of these biologists, the anthropologists, archaeologists, etc., when these ologists, when they first came to this part of the world and they first started writing about us, why did they always use those words, primitive and childlike, to describe us, right? And what I love about him is he doesn't go for the low-hanging fruit. He doesn't immediately go to, what a bunch of racist such and such is. What he said was, there is a system of thought going on over there that causes those people, every time they see us, to have those words come to mind. And he said, I want to know what that system of thought is that makes it so that we look like that to them, Right. And so what he said was, he said, maybe if I understand where they come from, and what their culture is like, then I will understand why, when they see us, they have that perception. So what he realized was the majority of those early anthropologists who did the writing about, encountering Native American culture here on this continent, they were primarily English aristocrats, men.
Yeah.
Okay. And so in their culture, he saw that up until the age of 5, everybody's allowed to sing, dance, play, pretend, etc. But at the age of 5, it's time to get down to the serious business of being a man. And I'm going to also add a man in the power over paradigm that was well underway at that point. And so it's time to get down to that business. And so in that culture, the way that you do that is you set aside everything else except for honing the intellect. Now, you can have music and you can have other things as sort of hobbies, but the way you present yourself to the world is always through your intellectual ability. And so he said, wow, so that's how their culture moves. So when those men came to this part of the world and they saw us, what were we doing? We were singing, we were dancing, we were seeing things they could not see. We were having conversations with things like water and et cetera that they didn't believe you could have a conversation with. And so their only conclusion was these must be very primitive people, and they're also very childlike because even their men are engaged in the activities of children. And so when I read that, it was like this huge opening and awakening happened for me. I went, wow, okay. So not only that, but what that says to me is that my people, for instance, they from birth until death, they never stop those activities. There's never a place to say, okay, we're going to put all that away and now we're only going to go with the intellect. In fact, the intellect is probably the least reliable way of knowing.
Absolutely.
For many cultures all around the world, right? And so the song informs us. The dance informs us. And it informs us, about this coherence that's going on all around us. And then we fast and we receive vision that tells us about our reality and about our role in it. What I realized is that by keeping all of those ways of knowing open, that's how we are able to have relationship to place such that we can have sustainability. So my conclusion, in my own scientific inquiry, is to say, is having a broad spectrum of ways of knowing, is it coincidental that these peoples who have a broad spectrum of ways of knowing also have sustainability? And my conclusion is no, that's not an accident. We need to have a broad spectrum of ways of knowing in order to be able to understand this place that we're in. It's not a place that can be understood through intellect alone.
Absolutely. With the connection to nature and the land and the earth, that if we listen, if we have that simple connection with the earth, that the earth will tell us what we need to know and what we need to do and when we need to do it.
Yes, and how to do it.
And how to do it. Exactly. And so by cutting all that connection off, what they deemed as primitive, that's the loss of the connection to Mother Nature, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
So this is a system, a paradigm choice, let's call it, in which we agree to be indoctrinated, or at least our parents agreed to have us be indoctrinated in such a way that we would only have our intellect as a way of knowing by going to school, in some cases even through our religious institutions, or in so many different ways. We've been talked out of the value of all of the ways of knowing apart from the intellect. And so we're in this place of suffering. So part of what I said, in this inquiry around my coming here as the embodied feminine, was I said, okay, so how do I in what ways am I enacting my perfect design and in what ways am I not? And so part of what arose for me was in ceremony, women, and this is true in many indigenous cultures everywhere, that when a woman is menstruating, she is held as being in a very different space, energetically, vibrationally, and her capacity is different. Now, because patriarchy traveled the world on those ships, a lot of patriarchy infiltrated indigenous cultures as well, I would say. And so, along with, literally being brought into residential boarding schools that were, being held by that European power over paradigm model in which men were the rulers, and also into parochial institutions. Indigenous people were forced into those places and kind of had that way of thinking and being imposed upon them. And so, even when they came out of there and made the choice to come back to our own ways, some of that residual stuff and that orientation, I think, definitely has infiltrated our own ways. And so even in indigenous culture, women struggle sometimes, especially around this menstruation piece. So for whatever reason, I was shown a way to be able to use that time or be in that time in a very with great intention. And what I'll say about it is that I realize that my biology gives me a spiritual capacity. So I'm going to say that at that time of moon time, I have an ability to access and commune with this Mother Earth in a very unique way that really no other human being can do in quite the same way as a menstruating woman.
Absolutely,
And so, I think it's no accident. I think our biology gives us a lot of clues as to what our perfect design is, because we haven't been headed in the wrong direction so long that our biology is devolved into, helping us destroy things. It's still doing its best to uphold the plan for thriving life. So I think it's no accident that when women all live together, what happens, right? All their cycles sync up. And so I'm like, something is supposed to be happening then.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you picture, all these humans living in little tribal communities, there was a certain time every month when all the women would head into that space. And so something is supposed to happen during that time.
Right.
And so what I learned was that I had an ability to connect and receive nurturing and nourishment from the Mother Earth. And I also had the ability to receive instruction and vision for how to be here.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, wow, at this time on the planet, although I know a lot of the younger generations, it's kind of funny for me to say that, I don't feel that old, but it's definitely time for me to start saying that. The younger generations have a lot more awareness than my generation, and certainly than my mother's. But, by and large, we still tell the women, look, we don't want to hear about your menstruation. We don't want to see any evidence of it. You must, it's a horror if we see any evidence of it whatsoever. Even you pulling a little package out of your purse quietly is, if I happen to see that, that's still a violation of me and a horror,
Yeah,
and
you're trying to hide it all.
Yeah, and we want you to just do whatever you got to do over there and act like nothing is happening. That's what we demand of you. And it's so crazy because it's really, when you honor that space, it is a completely altered state of being.
Yeah.
When you really enter into that place, right? Absolutely. And so really what I've finally come to realize is that I'm not supposed to be in linear thought and linear logical, not that kind of logic, linear logic, I'll say, mode all the time in my life as a woman. I am supposed to depart from that and move into a way of knowing that moves in a very different way from that. And that's true during my menstruation. That's true during my move as I have been, into my elderhood. So I'm going through the menopausal time. And I'm not supposed to be in that linear place there. And even as an elder woman, I'm going to say I'm not supposed to be in that that linear place. I used to say I'm not supposed to be in that logical place, but there is a deep logic that happens in this other place. It's just not linear.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the language of it is very foreign to the world. And I'm realizing now, because my aunts, I would watch my aunts, and I thought they were just going completely bonkers, right? I couldn't understand why we would head out to the store and, 5 minutes later, they were not remembering where we were headed. And I was like, what? I really thought, I feel sad in a way about saying this, but it's also humorous. I thought my aunts were not too bright.
Okay.
But what I realize now is that when I was a child, they were going through their menopausal time, and they were in a very altered state, very altered state. Yeah. And so now that I've been passing through that, I am coming to understand the gifts of it. And actually, the world is really hungry for the feminine voice that comes out of those places.
Absolutely. In Ayurveda, we call the postmenopausal stage the wisdom stage of life. That wisdom that comes in that stage of life needs to be shared with the younger ones to help them through the times. And like you said, it's all a cycle, and our menstrual cycle is it's something that we need to pay attention to. We've been told to, like you said, disregard it and just get on with things and keep it very discreet. But it's something that with each week of our menstrual cycle, we go through different changes, particularly when we are on our cycle. There's a very creative, intuitive time for women. And that's what I would definitely recommend to people out there listening, is pay attention to that in your cycle and pay attention to the shifts in your mood. And like you said, we can't just be on, right? We can't be linear all the time. That we have this very deep connection to the earth, to the moon, to the lunar cycle. And this is something that needs to be respected. And it's a gift that Mother Nature has given us.
Well, and it's a gift to the world.
Yeah.
Imagine if the women were able to take that space of, it can be very simple. I can just sit and acknowledge to the Mother Earth, I am in this time. And what we say is we're dismantling the holy altar of life at that time. And so energetically or literally, that offering is one of the highest offerings we can make to this Mother Earth. And we say that, so that's happening. We can make this offering to the Mother Earth on behalf of humanity, not just women. Yeah. But on behalf of all of us, in acknowledgement of our life cycle and our life. And then, we also have the ability at that time to receive in a very different way. We say that gateway between heaven and earth in the woman's body, known biologically as the cervix, it's open at that moment. And so at that point, we're able to draw in deeply from this Mother Earth. And so we say that, the women are the backbone of the family. The women are the backbone of the community. Well, as we know in modern world, how does she sustain herself if she's being the backbone, right? Well, this is part of it. We receive it from the mother. We receive her nourishing, her nurturing, and then also her instruction. So, if that's one of our primary modalities for receiving instruction about how to be here, gosh, we could sure stand to have some of that right about now.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is
and
the
I would
wisdom
say that
we need.
A lot of my visions and work have, came out of I only got to spend about 7 years in full awareness of the spiritual capacity that my biology gave me. But it set me up to know now that I'm no longer able to do that part of the journey. It let me know that is a trustworthy path.
Yeah, absolutely.
To follow those visions that arise out of that nonlinear place.
So what would you advise women out there listening now who want to get in touch with that intuitive time, with that creative time on their cycle? What advice would you give?
I would advise them to work on experimenting, I guess we could call it, with just sitting quietly and acknowledging to the earth that you are making this offering to her of this sacred altar of life, whether you're literally giving that blood to the Mother Earth or whether you're just energetically sitting at your altar or in a quiet place in your house even. Obviously, it's great to do it outside on the land. I'm looking at this foot of snow outside, so I'm not really thinking that way right now. But But to sit out there and just acknowledge to her. I mean, it's a very simple process to just say, "Mom, I'm here, and with consciousness, I'm offering this this high offering to you of our life, the beginnings of our life. And I reach out to you to give me your, just like I said, your nurturing, the nourishment, and also any instruction that you have for me, for my life, and for all of us of how to live here. And, even if you can spend just a couple hours in that space, a new relationship will begin. Now, I'm gonna also give a warning here, because if you really turn to your moon time and open this door of a conversation with the Mother Earth during your moon time will not leave you alone. Your moon time is not going to let you continue to act like nothing is happening.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a commitment. It's kind of a launching place. And really that shift of my moon time no longer allowing me to just pretend it's not happening was the beginning of a radical change in my whole life, my lifestyle, my life way that has turned out to be absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But, one of the first things that I did was I went to a job interview after I'd really started in this practice, and it was kind of, having its way with me.
Right.
But I went to a job interview and I said, look, I will not be here 4 days out of the month. And I can know roughly when they're going to be, but not exactly. I said, if there's something really, really pressing that only I can do, then of course I will do my best to be there. But in general, as a general practice, I won't be there. And you will not regret it, because it'll be so fruitful for the work that we're doing together that it's going to be fine. And I got hired.
Beautiful.
So,
That's wonderful.
and I know that there's a company in England, and I wish I'm going to have to keep remembering who it was, but apparently they've just made this company policy.
Yes, I read that last year. I think that came in either 2017 or something like that. Yes, and I've heard of some companies doing this. And I remember going to a seminar on menstrual cycles for women and the changes every week, and how we really should be, of course, acknowledging it, the time, the moon cycle, and also celebrating it. And where possible, taking downtime. Like, this is a time we should really be nurtured and celebrating it, maybe wearing something red at that time. And it's a powerful time. And it's amazing to hear that once you started recognizing that path, that it really became even more powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And so, I know we're coming close to our time, so I also want to be sure and speak a little bit about the sacred masculine.
Yes, and we can.
So
you're okay on time, so yeah.
Yeah, and so this exploration, this inquiry, then about what does it mean for me to be the embodied feminine of our kind. This began to be part of the answer. Was I have to pay attention to my biology and the spiritual capacity that it gives me. And so as I was, what I was noticing is I felt like, as I began to understand my part of that functional polarity, then the other part of that functional polarity also begins to become a little clearer. And, again, I want to say that, I speak sometimes in a way that feels very binary, and I want to acknowledge that, my culture and my own understanding says that, our gender is not a binary, it's a spectrum. And I want to learn some more about that spectrum. But for now, I'm working with what I'm calling masculine feminine dynamic and this polarity. So just to acknowledge that I understand that there's a spectrum. But I will speak here in this way for this moment. And so, so for me, what I realized was, when I really go full on into moontime dreaming, also I'll say that, if you fall asleep in that space of having opened that space with the Mother Earth and acknowledging what's happening at that time in your relationship with her, it's very possible you're going to get super sleepy and fall asleep, right? And so, when I hold that space for women and I put them in that space when we're doing other ceremony, they'll fall asleep often, and we say that's good. We try to make them comfortable. We give them, food and drink and everything and pillows and I put them on a buffalo robe and, I make it as nice as I can. And because we say that their dreams is a primary way of the knowing. And so we want them to dream.
Yeah.
So I get into a very deeply altered state. And what I realize is, and this is sort of a primal way of speaking, I suppose, but that I can't protect myself at that time. I'm out there somewhere in the dream world. And so literally, when I think about us as tribal people living out and not in these structures and all, I think, wow, I would have really needed protection at that time.
Yeah.
And so, this fundamental idea of that comes to me about what is like core about the sacred masculine is we say that they're protectors and providers. They're protectors of life. Yeah. That's their highest imperative. They're to be protectors of life. That means they're to be protectors of the life bringer and the children and the elders. Yeah. And they're also to be providers for that. And that's not to say that that's only their job all the time, but that's a primary place for them. And so, as soon as I say that, what I always want to say to men of our time, I'm like, so for me to say that, your part of your sacred attributes is to be protector and provider, I said, I can imagine that that's not really good news to you. Because here we are with more and more, and even in the United States, moving into like this sort of, this police state is just humming underground, and, our police are coming into question, and the authorities, and everything's in a big swirl, and it's a little unclear what's going to happen with all these things. And certainly for men of color, how do you protect your own?
Right.
So it's a daunting thing, I would imagine, for me to say that to men, and also providing, oh my gosh, well, as we're discovering this power over paradigm, everybody's jockeying for position, but really all the fruits of all the labor of everybody is all flowing to the top, and so we're talking about the 1%.
Exactly.
And everybody else is in a mad scramble to just have their basic needs met. Yeah. And so in that paradigm, to talk about a man's role being a provider is pretty prickly. And so, I want to acknowledge that. And what I often say to the men is, I am so worried about you in that power over paradigm, because it's a rigged system and you were never meant to win in there. Yeah. And I'm worried that you're going to break yourself trying in there. And I want to say to you that that's not the only way. Right. And I don't want you to be broken. I need you to be whole. I so badly need you to be whole. And I need you to have your full spectrum of ways of knowing, which includes your whole feeling center, your emotional body, your intuition, your wonder. I need that from you in order for me to be whole. In our interplay. And so I always want to say that to the men. And so part of what I've been doing, and this came out of Eve Ensler. I got to see Eve Ensler speaking with Starhawk at Bioneers a couple of years ago, and Eve said this thing, and other people have been talking about it as well. I think maybe Charles Eisenstein's new and ancient story comes out of this idea as well. But it's like, when we don't have a narrative for something, it remains largely invisible to us. We say, because we're story-based beings. And so right now I'm feeling like one of our big missing pieces is we don't have any narrative for the sacred masculine. And we need it. Right. And so I've begun a little bit of that.
Beautiful. And what comes up for me when you talk about the masculine and the shift that needs to happen there is it's really, going back to that childlike way, going back to that, quote unquote primitive way, to have that connection, to be more vulnerable, to be more open, like you talk about, to be more full spectrum, to be more emotional, to embody the emotion side as well, rather than just this power ego side. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, even there, we're still using those terms, childlike and primitive, and those are hard for us in the way our ego has been groomed. But really, it's about being in a raw state, maybe is a better way to try to say it.
Yeah, no, that is. And I think, I think it's important, and it's a part of a responsibility for women to allow the men to be vulnerable and to let them know that they don't have to be that protector all the time, that it's okay for them to show their vulnerability. And in fact, I think women connect more when they do show their vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, and I have 4 sons and 1 daughter, so I've had an opportunity to watch this watch this process unfold. Yeah. And and my daughter talks about this quite a bit. My daughter is Lila June Johnston, and but I'm going to agree with her in the sense of saying that I really feel like the men are actually much more tender than women are.
Yeah.
And so it's an even greater tragedy that they have been talked out of that aspect of themselves, that this power over paradigm, doesn't accommodate or allow that. And what I know from being in Indigenous ceremony is, when the men really get down and pray. So I'm thinking about it, supposedly the women are like the emotional ones, but when I think about it, I'm like watching these men get down and pray and weep and cry and pray over their grandkids going to school, and they pray over their little backpacks and their little pencils and their little, they're just so tender. They're weeping with love and tenderness for what they love. And so a man, in this case, these Indigenous men are carrying that level of tenderness, and at the same time, they're also to be able to, come together as men and pray again in ceremony and pray to the animal that they're going to hunt, and then go and take that life.
Yeah.
And so I just think about that, and I think, wow, now that is a huge spectrum that a man is carrying.
Very much so.
Huge.
Yeah.
And so, so I just have such respect for that. And I just wonder, wow, what would our world be like if men had that encouragement, nurturing, and eventually modeling of really embodying that, all of that emotional spectrum that they carry.
Yeah.
And, I do get to meet men, usually they're Indigenous men, who do embody that whole spectrum. And it's just, God, there's just for me right now, because it's so rare and I'm so tuned into it, like there's nothing more beautiful to me than a man sharing their heart. There's nothing more powerful to me than a man sharing their heart. Yeah. It's just, that's a voice that we don't get to hear from a lot.
No, and it's a beautiful thing.
And we need to.
Yeah, absolutely. When a man is in their center and is okay with being vulnerable and emotional and being strong at the same time, like you said, that huge spectrum, and when you get to see it all with no ego, completely open, it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Pat, I could talk to you for hours. It's been an amazing conversation. Can you leave us with a little bit of advice today for men and women out there about how they can begin in a simple way, if you have a simple piece of advice in a complex situation, of how they can begin that reconciliation, either within themselves or with the masculine and feminine? What advice would you give to people? It's a big question, I know.
Well, I was told when I was in deep inquiry, and this really came on when I was coming into my menopausal time, and other women were saying to me, just you wait, you will be invisible to this world.
Yeah.
And I will say that by and large that's fairly true.
Oh, really?
Because there's no narrative for the elder woman when she's she's not in her, I don't know, her sex symbol phase of life.
Right, exactly.
There's like no narrative for her.
Yeah.
And so we're like, we don't really know what to do with her. And so I'm working on creating some narrative around that as well.
Beautiful.
But, you know, so I went through this very angry phase of like, well, what the heck, you know, and all the spirit grandmothers that helped me during all of my moon time work, you know, they said, hey, we didn't bring you this far to drop you on your head. This is part of that continuum. Just stay with us. And so I guess I'll go ahead and say this, that they said, you know, you're in labor again. And this time you're going to birth yourself.
Ooh, I got goosebumps. That's amazing.
You're going to birth yourself as the fruitful woman, you know, and we think of women of childbearing age being fruitful, but this kind of fruitfulness is on many, many levels. So it's that wisdom level. And so they said to me, you know, if you don't deny this journey, you know, that you will be able to claim a seat in the grandmother's lodge. And the grandmother's lodge has to be reinstated on this earth because the grandmother's lodge is the counterbalance to the masculine leadership. So anyway, they painted a picture of what my role is in this world, and that was very helpful to me. But anyway, so I was in this angry phase before that happened, and they told me, you know, if you will go outside every morning and make an offering to the sun, present yourself to the sun, you will. So, you know, to do that, you know, people often ask me, well, how do you start these spiritual relationships? How do you start having these conversations with water and trees and white buffalo calf women and, you know, and I say, you know, we start by going out in the morning and making an offering. So for us, we use tobacco or cornmeal here in this part of the world. Other parts of the world, it might be something else. But to acknowledge yourself as part of this larger community and to invite them into the conversation for the day, you know, is a way that we begin to develop that muscle of that spectrum of ways of knowing, I think. But also what they said to me is if you will do that with the sun every day, you will come to know everything you want to know about the interplay between masculine and feminine. And that seemed really like a roundabout way, right? But what I found, the first thing that happened when I was doing that was, you know, I would kind of stumble outside in my pajamas because I wanted to be out there early. Yeah. And I was thinking, gosh, I know my grandmothers would not be that happy about me doing it this way. So then I began to like put on a dress and go outside, and then I actually began to dress for it, to present myself and like, as I say, uphold the honor of being human being. So to present myself in an honorable way to the sun. And then I realized that as a woman, you know, I had this beautiful thing going on where I was dressing myself for the sun. And that just unlocked so much of all of this weird stuff about, you know, dressing for men or dressing for other women, or, you know, that whole weird thing. Yeah. And so I began to heal because now I'm dressing for the sun. Yeah. And so, you know, I guess that would be one step we could say that they told me. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I love the idea that menopause is a rebirth, and it goes hand in hand with what Ayurveda says, which, like I said earlier, menopause or post-menopause is considered the wisdom stage of life. And it's the stage where you show your true colors, and where you no longer want to keep up with the Joneses or worried about materialism, that you now have this spiritual connection. And it's really the truth of you coming out. So I love that. And I think a new narrative needs to be given around that. And it's wonderful that you're working on that. And I would love to talk to you about that again another time. Yeah. So one phrase that came to me about it is it's the burning off of the unessential.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You said that the elderhood is the counterbalance to the masculine?
The grandmother's elderhood.
Yeah. To this pyramid structure.
Well, or even to a healthy masculine leadership.
Okay. Great. Because there is that wisdom that we need. And this is why I think a huge part of why we're struggling is because we don't have the elders within our community anymore to give us that guidance. And we need more of that input.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, Pat, thank you so much. You've educated us so much today. And like I said, I could talk to you for hours. But where can people go to find out more about your work, Pat?
Well, I have a fairly new website up that I haven't honestly contributed to recently, but that's part of my New Year's resolution. I find that websites and blogs and et cetera can start to run me rather than me running them. So I'm trying to keep that from happening. But my website is www.patmccabe.net.
.net, wonderful. And I'll put that link in the show notes for everybody. And then you do speaking events throughout the U.S. and internationally as well?
Mostly internationally, honestly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm in France, so I need to keep an eye out when you're over in Europe.
Yeah, I'll be up in the UK at least twice this year.
Okay.
I will be in Portugal, Turkey.
Great.
Probably India as well. So, all that's coming up. Sweden.
Well, this is all great signs to see that you are speaking international and that you're people want to hear what you have to say. I think that is a very positive way to end this recording, that people are starving for this information.
Well, it's a great honor for me to try to voice what I hear from this Mother Earth, because she's the voice, she's the authority here, and we would be wise to listen for her voice. Absolutely. So if I can carry some of that, I'm honored.
Well, Pat, we are honored to have you share this information with us on the podcast today. And thank you so much for all this amazing work you're doing in the world. It's very necessary, particularly at this time. And I look forward to keeping track of what you have in the future.
Thank you, Colette. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Take good care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, wasn't that amazing? With Woman Stands Shining, Pat McCabe. Such an honor to have her on the show. And I really hope that you enjoyed it too and got great value out of it. I think that this is the wisdom and the messages we need right now in the world to really birth ourselves anew, as Pat said. I also just want to remind you that I have those 2 online programs starting January 18th, 2019, the Reset, Restore, Renew program and the Digestive Reset Cleanse. Obviously, it's getting very close to that date, so you can find the link in the show notes if you want to join those group online programs. And if you're listening to this podcast after those programs, don't worry, I provide them privately throughout the year, so you can just check out that information in the services tab on my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com. Thank you so much for listening in today. I always appreciate your support. And if you're finding this podcast helpful, you could please share it maybe with others who think would enjoy it, and perhaps leave a rating and review if you feel so called to, wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you. Take good care of yourself.